You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 271. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever noticed how inherently human it is to be rooting for the underdog, rooting for the person that has just had their butt kicked and they're on the ground and they don't take no for an answer and they get up and they fight and they win and you're just like, yes, you deserve that. Well done. It's rarely the people who coast through, right? They're all perfect. They never fall down. Everything just seems to be handed to them. They're fine. They're fine. But the people who really get me, at least the ones where I feel like I want to see you win, are the people who really have to struggle, right? The people who face real setbacks, who have real challenges, who pursue really big goals, really big dreams, and they do not take no for an answer. And if that resonates with you, then this week's podcast episode is going to resonate with you as well, because what we're talking about is how to recover after a setback. It is that art, it is that skill of picking yourself up when you're not feeling like everything is going your way, and you've got that perseverance, you've got that grit, you have the determination to make things right again for you. Now, if you've been following this podcast for the last couple of weeks, then you'll know that this is part 3 of a 4-part series, and it's focused specifically on getting back on track when your time management systems fail. So yes, we can talk about recovering from a setback in all sorts of different contexts. Today, we're talking about when your calendar, right, your systems, your time feels like it's kind of eluded you, right? The systems that you've had that you're depending on have slipped away. You aren't feeling as organized. Maybe you're feeling a little bit unsettled. You just got back from vacation. You just had a trial. You lack motivation. You don't know where to start. And so if this is you, then what we're going to talk about today is the steps to take to get yourself back on track, right? How to recover after the setback. Now, I mentioned this is part 3 of a 4-part series. So if you've been following along, then you know that part 1 was all about getting back on track and understanding why your time management systems fail. Now, this is true for everybody. It is true for lawyers. You'll develop the best time management systems, and chances are they are going to fail at some point. And I spent the first episode talking about why that is and the importance of understanding in your particular situation what caused the system failure in the first place, because that is going to help you identify the steps that you're going to want to take in order to solve the problem. Now, last week, week 2, I talked about the differentiating factor between who successfully gets back on track and who does not. And the episode really was about distinguishing who has a track, who chooses to have a time management system in the first place, because it is optional. Not everybody wants to have an intentional practice where they are mindful and deliberate about their time. They have systems that work just fine for them. They don't require the same level of focus as somebody like me and many of the lawyers that I work with, right? If you're like me, chances are you want to have systems in place. You crave those systems. Those systems help you feel in control. They help create accountability. They help provide structure to your days and your weeks. You know when things are happening and you feel in control. It's great for people like you and me. And if you're not interested in these systems, and that's fine, this probably doesn't apply to you. And the key to getting back on track is the decision to do so. The key is to not give up. The key is to say, okay, I know I'm going to have these systems. I know these systems are going to fail for one reason or another. It doesn't mean that my systems are all broken. It doesn't mean that I'm bad at managing my time. It is simply a fact of life. And with that acceptance, there is a choice that follows to decide I am going to get back on track. I'm going to be a person who, no matter what happens, chooses to get back on track. And so if that's you, then you probably find yourself here at week 3, where we're talking about what to do in that moment. So if this is you right now, right? Maybe you're experiencing a setback. You feel like you're off track, and what you really want is for me to help you get back on track. Perfect. If you haven't listened to those episodes, go back and listen to them. They will help you. If you want to simply dive straight in, that's fine too. But the goal here, the purpose here is for you to have a process to follow, a framework, so that you can get yourself back on track. So we are going to cover 3 main steps today. And then next week, we're going to talk about sustainability, right? So many lawyers that I speak with talk about wanting to make their practice feel sustainable. And it is a combination of so many things, including being able to get yourself back on track quickly and effectively when it happens. So that's next week. For this week, what you might find is, number 1, you had systems, right? You had systems, they were working, everything was great. You felt really confident, you felt really happy, things were getting done. And then the system failed, right? Something happened, right? You maybe became a parent for the first time. And next thing you know, everything is upside down. It's all different. And you're having to basically start from scratch. Or maybe you were promoted at work. And whereas before you were a lot more responsible for your work, but nobody else's, now you've got a team to manage and you're trying to figure out, how does this even work? Or maybe there's something else that has happened. You've moved and all of a sudden you've got a commute and that's taking out hours of your day. Or maybe it's something completely different. Maybe you've simply just gotten bored of your systems, right? The things that used to work are no longer working for you. So there can be all these reasons why the systems that you had are no longer working. And so you found, okay, I'm no longer on track. And you've made that choice, going back to last week, to make it work. You want to get back on track. What's next? So the 3 steps are as follows. Number 1, to accept where you are and assess the situation. Acceptance is really underrated. I don't think that we talk about it often enough. And acceptance isn't giving up. Acceptance isn't saying, well, this is just how it is, so there's nothing I can do about it. Not at all. Acceptance is when you stop fighting the facts as they are, right? It's actually looking around and creating an objective assessment of where things stand. So, for example, if you used to plan every Sunday or every Monday morning, and you haven't done that for 3 weeks, okay, well, chances are, as a result of that, some of your systems, they're outdated, right? They need to be updated. Or maybe there's deadlines that you're aware of them, but you haven't made a record of them in a way that fits for you, right? There are things that will signal to you that you're not where you want to be. And there are sort of these factual ways that this is showing up for you. So the very first step is to accept it, right? We want to remove the friction, the drama, the upsetness of it, but we're not saying, okay, I'm going to accept it and not do anything about it. We're accepting it as reality, and we're going to use that as our starting point for moving forward. So when you think about assessing the situation, accepting it for where it is, you can break it down into 2 main categories. And one would be the external, right? The external facts as you see them. So that could be where your systems are not being used the way that you normally would. Maybe you've got habits that have faded. So if you're a person that typically arrives at the office and organizes your workspace and creates a to-do list, and you haven't done that for the past 3 weeks, that might be a habit that you want to bring back in. It's much like if you're a runner and you go running every morning and then you drop the habit day by day, and then next thing you know, you want to reintegrate the habit. It's a habit, something that we want to readopt because it was really helpful. It could also be that you're adopting habits that don't serve you, right? This could be surfing the internet. It could be scrolling on your phone. It could be getting distracted by online shopping. It could be any number of things. I know for myself, there are certain things, scrolling at night, right? That is a habit that when I get into, it's one that I typically don't love. And I then, will decide one day, okay, I probably shouldn't do this anymore. You probably have your own habits, right? There's habits that you want. There's habits that you don't want. And so where are you at, right? Has something shifted there? I mentioned calendars before. So maybe you've got different calendars, a file list that you keep updated, but you haven't updated your file list in a few weeks. And now you're starting to feel like it's not as valuable because it's not up to date. It could simply be that you haven't had time. It could be something else entirely. So what we want to do here is just simply take an inventory of the external factors, right? What is it that makes you feel like you're off track? If you feel stressed about something, what is it that is bothering you? So we want to look at the external facts, right? Neutrally, right? Without judgment, just what is happening here. Let's assess the situation. And then I think it's also really helpful here to assess how you're feeling. Now, I know for myself and for lawyers that I have worked with that when you are off track, it can feel really unsettling. So I'm actually going to start with me because I know how I feel better than anybody else because it's me feeling it. But when I take a vacation, for example, or when we've had school breaks, there is often when I get back into my work mode, I will have a sense of inertia. I'll have a feeling of discomfort. I will be trying to figure out how to get back into the groove of my work and my non-work and how everything's going to balance together. And same thing when it goes from work to vacation. So I mentioned in an earlier episode that we are fresh into summer. We're about 2 weeks into July at the time of recording this podcast episode. And what I noticed was that June was a very busy month on a professional front and on the kid front. And so June was go, go, go. There was a lot happening. And then from one day to the next, all of the existing structures stopped, right? My work slowed down and the kids got out of school, right? And it was intentional. I had planned for this, and still the transition into summer felt very uneasy, right? I was very tired because I'd been pushing myself throughout June and May. And then to have this gap all of a sudden felt very unsettling. It's a little bit when you're in school and you write your exams and you've been pushing to the exam, and then you write all the exams. And I don't know about you, but for me, I would usually get sick the next day because all the adrenaline that was, keeping me alert and awake and focused, that's all subsided, and then life sets in. So you want to pay attention to how you're feeling, because if you're feeling off track, chances are there's some difficult emotions. Maybe it's physical as well, right? If you've been in a big trial and you've been going for weeks and you've been running on adrenaline and you've had these crazy deadlines and everything's busy, or it's a closing and it's the same thing. You're busy, you're running, it's tax season, it's some period at work where you're just super, super busy. And then you pull back, right? And it doesn't have to be work. It could be work and personal, or it's just personal, whatever it is. When you pull back, you notice it's almost like your body is so used to being hypercharged that when you take that step back, it feels like there's this big vacuum, and it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. People talk about the post-trial crash, right? It's like your whole nervous system has been wired to get you through the day, right? To survive, to thrive during this really heightened period of intense focus. And then there's this feeling of like, okay, now I can release. I don't have to do all of this. But it can be really hard at that point to get focused, right? If you think about times like that in your practice where you've had something like that, you're super focused, right? Chances are there's other work that might be coming in that is piling up. Maybe things like your admin tasks, not urgent tasks, emails pile up. And so you finish with this really intense deadline-driven project, and then you move into your non-intense but still quite full practice. And you can really lack inertia. You can really lack motivation to get started. And so this is exactly what I'm talking about here, is assessing the situation. What is going on factually, and how are you feeling, right? Maybe you're almost too relaxed, right? You come back from vacation and you're like, I don't want to work anymore. I just want to be on vacation. Or maybe you've been working really hard and what you really need is a bit of time off or something different. But chances are you might feel maybe stressed, right? You might feel a sense of frustration, right? That this just doesn't feel right. Why am I not able to perform in the way that I'm used to? You might even feel a sense of hopelessness, right? I know for some people, it's like you get back into the swing of things after a break and it just doesn't feel right. And you're like, is this it? Like, is this really it? And so there's a whole host of emotions. And so just giving yourself the time and space to allow for that, to accept that that is how you're feeling, that those are the facts on the ground, and to assess them as objectively as you can, that really is the first stage, the first step of recovering, right? Recovering after a setback. So that brings you to step 2. And step 2 is what I'm often walking my clients through when they come to me with this problem of having fallen off track, right? How do I get back on track? And so I will always give a pep talk. I will always set the stage. I will always manage expectations with them to help validate the idea that this is normal. This is completely normal. And then we want to start figuring out, like, how are we going to deal with this? And as much as I wish I had a magic wand and I could say that these things will clear themselves up on their own, most of the time when you are off track, then there is a commitment that is required to getting yourself back on track. So that means scheduling time in your calendar, right? It's really giving yourself enough time in your calendar to basically do 3 things. And the first thing that needs to be done is to identify what needs to be done. So if you've already done that step of assessing where you're at, then you've probably got a pretty good head start, right? You see where you're at, and you maybe already know that there's a number of things, like there's emails that you need to respond to. There's invoices that you need to update and send out. There are projects that you need to look at to check where you're at. Are you on track? Are there deadlines coming up? So you will know that there are things that you need to do. And the very first block of time really does go to assessing, like identifying what needs to happen, and ideally then organizing those tasks, right? So if I think about time management and creating systems, usually one of the first things is assessing all the work that is coming in, right? What are all the different inputs? Where is the work coming from? What is the work? What are the files? What are the projects, etc.? So it's almost like we're getting back to square one here and just taking an inventory of what needs to happen. And from there, we're going to identify what some of the more immediate, short-term, possibly time-sensitive tasks are. And that's going to be your second time commitment. So the first time commitment is you just need to get yourself organized, right? If you've got a bunch of sticky notes and emails that you sent to yourself and notes on a pad of paper, and you've just got a collection, right? You've got a half updated file list, whatever the data is that you need to gather that data and do some sort of a review so that you know exactly what's on your plate. And then we're going to create some time to actually do those things. So this is where I have clients who might need to come in on a weekend and devote an entire day just to dealing with their email, or devote several weekend days in a row to clean up the back end of their files, right? Maybe that's kind of where things have arrived at their practice. And so when it comes to getting back on track, yes, absolutely, there is a requirement to play catch up, right? If that's what is required, and to carve out the time and space that you need in order to play catch up. And then the third thing then that you'll want to do is to create a new plan. Right? You don't want to simply execute on the tasks and then be done with it. The goal here is to get back on track by creating a new plan. So whatever your systems look like, I love doing week-to-week plans. So I would probably recommend starting with that, right? Once you've got your inventory, is simply to plan out your next week so that as you step into your next week, you have something that feels really solid. What you're going to want to do here is, depending on why it is that you were off track in the first place, you may need to make some adjustments. So if what happened was you simply got bored of your systems, right? They stopped working. Maybe you need some jazzy new systems to make things feel interesting again. Maybe there are systems that, because they were not working, you just stop using them, right? If notifications aren't your thing, I don't use notifications because they don't work for me. I don't like them. I don't pay attention to them. So if that's you, then you probably don't want to build a system around them. If you had things that were working really well, then we want to go back to those things, right? Even if they weren't working for whatever reason, you weren't keeping up with them. Sometimes just the idea of being back into the system, back into the habit of doing them, is enough to reintegrate a habit that has fallen away. And so what you're really doing here is you're creating a plan and you're doing it mindfully, right? You're leaning in on the things that worked. You may be letting go of practices that maybe weren't working, and maybe you're innovating a bit here. You're adapting. You're figuring out what needs to change here. And again, depending on the reason for the failure, right? You might just be tweaking. If you've got an entirely new life circumstance, right? You're a new parent and you're trying to figure out a whole new system, or you've just started your own firm and you need a whole new system, or you've got a new role and you need a whole new system. Great. Then we're going to want to focus in on what that whole new system looks like. And we're going to be troubleshooting. But if it's something like you had a trial and you had a system that was working great for the year leading up to the trial, and now we're reintegrating, chances are we're going to take a lot of what you were working with and we're going to rebuild that. The issue wasn't so much the system, it was the stress that was put on the system. And now that the stress is gone, we want to put things back in place. So that really is step 2. If we go back to where we're at in terms of the actual steps to recover from the setback, number 1 is that assessment, right? Factually what's going on. How do you feel? We want to accept that. We want to start where you are. Number 2 is we want to set time aside, right? Time aside, number 1, simply to organize, identify what is going on, what you have on your plate. Number 2, to perform tasks, right? Some of the shorter term, more urgent tasks, things that need to get done. Do we need to schedule time outside of regular work hours to catch up on those things, to get back on track? And then 3rd, we want a new plan. We want to draw up a new plan so that you've got that plan for implementing systems that previously were working for you. And then that brings us to the 3rd step, right? Which is to reintegrate, right? Reintegrate your plan one step at a time, which really means following the plan that you set for yourself, following the systems that you have set up for yourself. And the biggest thing here is that we do not want this to feel like an all or nothing exercise. This is not a time for perfectionism. This is a time for rebuilding, right? Chances are the systems that you had in place were working really well were the result of tweaks and adjustments that happened over time, right? You didn't just all of a sudden step into them and they were perfect. And we want to give ourselves the same grace when getting back on track. So please don't put the pressure on yourself for it to be perfect. You want to be patient with yourself. You want to bring that plan back into effect one step at a time. You want to feel reasonably good about it, and you want to get support where you need it. And that could be getting support from your colleagues, from your assistant, from other lawyers, from family members. It could be getting support from a coach, somebody like me, who can help you with the implementation, who can help you where you're having challenges so that you're either figuring out a way to do the things that are on your plan, or you're finding ways to adjust your plan so that it feels a lot more doable for you. So to recap, what we talked about today is really that 3-step process of getting back on track. Number 1, to assess, right? Identify what's happening and to assess what's on your plate externally and internally. Number 2, you're going to set aside time to take that inventory of what needs to happen. You're going to set aside time to do things that you know need to happen that maybe aren't the things that are most fun. Typically when this happens, it's inboxes that need tidying up. It's admin that needs to be attended to. It's big projects that have been languishing on a virtual file or somewhere. So these are things that we need to carve out time for. And then finally, that time for future planning, right? To get those systems back up and running. What types of systems do you want to have? And then finally, we're going to implement, right? We're going to start testing. We're going to get back into the swing of things. We're going to pull you back on track. You are going to pull yourself back on track. And that is the 3rd step, is actually doing these things. So I'm really glad that you joined me here this week. I hope that these steps are ringing true for you. They make sense, right? If you sit down and you break it down, and sometimes it just helps to have somebody walk you through it. And if I can do that for you, right? If you find yourself struggling and what you really need is somebody to just hold your hand and walk you through this process, I can do that. And I would love to do that. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer your questions for you. This is so common. It is absolutely doable, and you can do it on your own. You can do it with support. And I am just delighted that you're here. And I hope that this episode has resonated with you. Now, with that, I am going to be back next week, and I hope that you join me, because what we're going to talk about is creating sustainability in your practice. And again, this is just something that lawyers say they want, right? You're busy, you have a high pressure job, there's all sorts of things happening at any given moment. And so how do you create a practice that feels sustainable? And this is a key part of it. Getting yourself back on track is a key part of it. So we're going to look at it from a sustainability perspective and also more of a big picture perspective as well. So I'm so glad you joined me here this week. I hope to reconnect with you again next week. And again, if you've got questions, please do reach out. Take care. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.